In tonight's Technology Insider, the rapidly changing prospects for urban driving. Today, McKinsey Company published a study that finds as many as 15% of cars sold in 2030 could be fully autonomous. It's a developing science, but major automakers are already betting big. Joining me with the latest is Brian Fung, technology reporter at The Washington Post. Brian, let's start with this study. What is urban driving and why is it changing?
Well, urban driving refers to what millions of Americans do every day, which is simply drive around in cities. And the way that this could change is with automated driving vehicles. And so you may have heard of companies such as Google working on self-driving cars, or Tesla, which last year rolled out an autopilot function that lets you basically cruise along on the highway without your hands on the wheel. Both of these technologies and many of the technologies that other car makers are working on too would allow people in cities to essentially stop owning cars, because you could have fleets of networked automated vehicles picking you up, driving you to someplace, and then dropping you off, and then going off to pick up some other person, and then driving them someplace too. It's potentially a really efficient way to use cars in a city where there are lots of people.
And hard to believe this could become a reality. Now enter General Motors. The company, criticized just a few years ago for failing to evolve, just made a big financial bet on driverless cars. Tell us more.
Yeah, so GM is investing $500 million into the ride-sharing company Lyft. Obviously, we've got a competitor to Lyft, Uber, investing heavily in robotics and self-driving cars itself. So this is basically a big way for Lyft and GM to compete with Uber and try and bring about this world where you have personal mobility, you have cars picking you up and dropping you off on demand instantaneoly in cities. Now, for rural areas, it could be a very different system where people continue to buy and own cars, but for many Americans and people around the world, what this could result in is a big change for the way that we experience car driving.
Brian, why would GM invest in Lyft? Their business model limits the number of vehicles on the road. It seems counterintuitive.
Well, as companies like GM know, selling cars, which has been a traditional way that these car makers have been doing their business, is no longer going to be the sole way that they make money in the future. If you look at, again, the way that urban driving is going to change in the future, people are going to be owning cars less and less. And so many of these companies, including Ford, by the way, has said, we're looking more and more at things like vehicle miles traveled. So even if we're selling fewer cars than we did before, we're still seeing that there are going to be lots and lots of cars racking up lots and lots of miles, even if they're not privately owned. So what can we do with this? Essentially, the answer is looking into paid services that these companies can operate on top of the cars, rather than just selling the cars themselves. Now,
you mentioned Ford. Are other major automakers partnering with Silicon Valley?
Just recently, Ford was reportedly in a deal with Google to work on self-driving cars. Also you have companies such as Apple reportedly working on next-generation automotive technology. We haven't seen yet the fruits of that labor, if it is happening indeed. But this is something that is very clearly happening in the industry. Automakers ranging from BMW to Nissan to Toyota have all been getting in on understanding next-generation automotive technologies.
Apple's going to be the big story this upcoming year, I think. There's speculation they might buy Tesla. Who knows? So, Brian, bring this all together for us. What do futurists see as the ultimate outcome here? What will the future of driving look like?
Well, as the McKinsey report pointed out, you could see that the New York urban driving landscape, that market could look much closer to what Shanghai looks like, rather than to what Kansas looks like. And the upshot being that urban driving is going to be very different. It's going to change quite dramatically in the future as people own fewer and fewer cars, but use more and more cars to get around in ways that are more efficient than the way that we currently go about driving.
And as we see this traffic, 66, 95 still might be a mess 20 years from now, if not worse. Good to have you on the program. Brian Fung, technology reporter for The Washington Post. Thanks again, Brian.
Thanks for having me.